Hi everyone, this is Alan McKay. Welcome to episode 51. This episode is about programming for artists, and for everyone who doesn't think that they have a programming bone in their body or that it's not really going to benefit them, this is specifically for you because I really want to emphasize both how important this is for automating a lot of what you do and really allowing you more time to be creative, as well as showing you how to think about it so that way you can adapt a lot of the practices, because I know a lot of us kind of get really intimidated at the concept of coding, especially if you aren't good at math like myself. So let's dive in.
Welcome to the Alan McKay Podcast. Alan is an Emmy Award-winning visual effects artist and mentor to many leading industry experts. Listen in as Alan talks with other industry leaders in film, video games, and visual effects about their experience, lessons, and methodology. Alan will teach you pivotal advice to fast-track your career, better your skills, and reach your ultimate dream job. Check out the latest episodes on alanmckay.com.
Okay, so welcome to a new episode. I'm really excited about this one. This is something that I've wanted to do for a while, just because I think that it's so valuable to a lot of us, and it is something that I've started to kind of really teach and preach, I guess, over the past year or two especially, and that is about the importance of learning to program and do all that stuff as an artist. And I'm just going to quickly say ahead of time, for a lot of you who, when you think of programming, you instantly think that's not for me. Either, I suck at math, or I'm not smart enough to do that, or I don't need to know that kind of crap. Whatever it's going to be, I just want to kind of put you in the situation of this. This is the sort of thing that you can learn. It's just a matter of kind of approaching it in the right way, and I will definitely kind of dive into that pretty soon, because I know for a fact that when you do, let's say if you actually did look around and say, okay, well, let me go and do some tutorials on programming or whatever, instantly it starts throwing out all these weird terms and going into learning equations and all this crap. And I think sometimes I've seen courses or tutorials and, they start referring to their basic, grade 10 math or whatever. And the thing is, for me, as I'm sure a lot of you know, I never finished high school. I literally made it about a week into grade 9 and quit. And I barely went to school pretty much from grade 4. I just was not going to school much at all. So I think I've done pretty well to kind of, over time, teach myself what I've needed to, about business, about a lot of different areas that I needed, but math is definitely not one of them. I don't think I'm stupid, but I definitely have not learned like every area of math, or there's certain areas or things that I have missed out on. I do think one advantage that I have is that I'm always intrigued and I'm always wanting to learn more. So if there's something that I don't know much about, or I'm not quite sure about something, I instantly kind of like attach myself to that subject and I learn the shit out of it. And I think that's a good way to approach it, is to learn the shit out of it. But that has definitely kind of helped me along the way. If there's something I don't know, I like to learn more about it. But in this case, it means that with math, I definitely don't know a lot of like the really advanced stuff. There's a lot of signs and symbols that I'll see and I'm like, I have no idea what that does. But I know all the basic stuff that I need to get by. I definitely know how to add, divide, and multiply. But when it comes to programming, and this is something I'll get into more in a moment, but this is an area that I just needed to find the right way to pick it up. And I was probably in the same boat as a lot of you in terms of not really knowing how to go about it, how to learn it, and so everything just seemed so intimidating. And that's because most programming out there, or at least a lot of the training or examples out there, are specifically aimed for people who, I guess, are more programmers. And so right away they start diving into all these kind of crazy concepts. What I want to teach you, or what I want to kind of at least introduce you to, is the possibilities of using it as an artist to allow you to be more creative and to actually maximize your time by automating all the areas that you don't need to waste time on yourself. Okay, I think this is a really exciting and also a really powerful subject, and one that I want to really kind of dive into a lot more. Couple of things I'm just going to quickly mention, and then I'm just going to get right into this. But first of all, this month I've pretty much put everything on hold, just to kind of focus on a lot of just stuff that I'm going to be doing this month. So next episode, I'm going to announce there's going to be a real review that I want to have coming up, probably a week after that. So it's going to be pretty soon, but I'll have more information about that in the very next episode. And in addition to that, I also want to do a career intensive before the end of the year. So what that is, it's something that I've done a lot in the mentorship, or at least I'm starting to do a little bit more now, because usually in the effects technical director mentorship that I run, we go through reviews, and I every 2 weeks I'll do a live session where I interact and review everyone's work, and we all kind of collaborate together, and I'm able to kind of answer questions, point out different ways to do things, or actually show on my screen how I might go about doing whatever they need to do, whatever the case might be. But I've also started to focus a lot on the career side as well, especially for those who are coming towards the end of it, who started last January. And this has been really cool to kind of answer a lot of questions and kind of help kind of fill in the gaps with their career, or maybe things that are going on in their life. And this has just become like a really valuable thing that I've found that a lot of us have been able to get a lot from. In fact, I just got an email earlier this week from one of my students who's gotten his third pay rise in the same year from the same company, which I thought was amazing. I'm actually going to speak to him more about that later this week, just to kind of get the details about that, because I'm kind of intrigued. But he said that a lot of that he learned from both the podcast, which I thought was great, as well as a lot of the things we discussed inside the mentorship. So I thought that was really cool. And so that's one thing I'd love to do, just as a public thing for all of us who maybe listen to the podcast or just are interested in this, is I'm going to announce next week a kind of live webinar event that we can all get together, and I'll try and answer as many questions and help people along the way. And the thing is, even if you don't get your questions answered, a lot of us still get so much from this. And that's the thing, is like, I think it's so valuable just being fly on the wall in those sessions. So I would love if I had this 20 years ago, or even 5 or 10 years ago. I think that this is really valuable. So there's going to be both that and the real review. I want to do another one of those for the end of the year, as well as for everyone in LA. I'm going to be hosting an industry drinks night for the end of the year. So try and get everyone together, from game studios to film and commercials. I think it would be a really good kind of blowout for all of us. Now, there's other stuff coming up. In fact, I'm just going to mention this. I always say it, but like, get on the Inside Circle, like my VIP list. If you just go to www.alanmckay.com/inside. Literally today, I'm going to be starting to send out a lot of videos that you will need to be on the list to receive. And I mean, as in today, you'll need to be on that list, because I'm going to start firing them out today. And it's not like something that, it's not like an autoresponder or anything like that. I'll be firing these out live. So these are actual training that I will be sending a lot of these out over the next couple of weeks, and I've been working around the clock on this stuff. It's going to be really, really cool. And that's about it. I just wanted to mention that because I've got a few really cool things coming up. I'm going to be mentioning all that both on the podcast, but more importantly, if you're on the VIP list, I'll be firing out links to all that stuff. But more importantly, I'm saying that a lot lately, more so, I'll be sending videos, like a lot of custom training material that is specific to this month. I really want this month for all of us to be one that we really grow and we're able to do a lot with. I know last year when I first launched the podcast, can't believe it's already been a year, I did that already. I was putting out 3, 4, or 5 episodes a week, which was insane. And I remember I was in my hotel in Vegas during Autodesk University, which was last week. And yeah, I was working on a Fume Effects workshop, a Houdini workshop, a Maya workshop, as well as about to launch the mentorship. And in addition to that, I was also putting out all these different episodes for the podcast, and I was writing a couple articles. I went to Vegas for a week, and I literally didn't leave my hotel room. I was just working around the clock trying to get all this stuff done. And also, yeah, preparing my talk for Vegas as well. And that was where I made that decision about 2015. I wanted to start saying no to everything, because that was a situation where I took on too much, and that was a situation where it just became too much, and I had to actually cancel out of one of those things just to make sure that the quality of everything else stayed at the quality that I wanted it to be. And so this year, as you all know, I made the focus on dedicating my entire year, which I've never done before, to the mentorship program, and that has been really good. And I've I'm going to be doing hopefully an episode before the end of the year to kind of talk about a lot of, I guess, my lessons learned this year. And that to me has been such a valuable one because I have still taken on a few projects this year, just ones that I personally wanted to do. It wasn't like, okay, a job's a job, I got to go get money to put on the table. Instead, I was picking projects very selectively, and I would actually put a lot of the clients through a bit of a grueling process, just making sure that they were the right projects for me and I was the right person for them. In a lot of cases, I actually recommended other people, friends of mine or other people that I knew would be able to do the work and leave everyone happy for those projects, because I didn't want to distract myself from my main goal this year, which was to dedicate all my time to these other people and kind of really help them and, really work on doing a lot of amazing content. So I put out something like 700 hours of training for, exclusively for the program, for the training, the mentorship. And that's been such a cool thing. It's also been a full-on thing, but that to me has been such a valuable lesson. Actually, just saying no, it meant that when I did say yes, it was to the projects I really, really cared about. Like I worked on a big promo for the TV show Manhattan, and I did that with the guys that I worked with on God of War like 2 years before that. So it was like bringing the band back together. It was really fun. We all got back together and teamed up on this project. There's been a couple other really big ones that I worked on. Obviously Call of Duty Black Ops 3 was another big one. So just lots of different things that I really enjoyed and I was really passionate about. And also when it came to money as well, if you're in a situation where you're saying no, it means that when the project you're going to do, if it isn't one that you want to do, there's always the, you can always put out a price that, I was going to say there's always the FU price, which basically means that, if it's something that you think is going to be a headache, you don't really want to do, you can always put out a price that kind of compensates for the fact that it's not something that ultimately you want to do. And if they say yes, great. And if they say no, then it wasn't meant to be. And, it's kind of rare that I do that, but occasionally it might be clients that I worked with before and I swore I would never work with again. And then, I basically say, okay, well, I'm going to be compensating for the fact that it might have been a good fit the first time around. So I know this time to kind of put the price in an area that I know I'm going to be more happy with putting in the extra work because financially it's going to be worth it. So you just got to find what way you're kind of getting remunerated or compensated that works best for you. Sometimes it's like the Manhattan thing is more a passion piece, even though pay and everything else was great. It was more because I knew I would enjoy it. But then there's occasionally projects you're like, this is going to be a headache, so let me make a price that I'm happy with. And if they say yes, then I'm not going to be at midnight 3 weeks into this thinking like, why did I do this? Because I can say, well, I did it because it's going to pay for my mini vacation next year or whatever. So just kind of figuring out what is your incentive. And that's another thing I want to talk about another time, just because some projects, you aren't doing it for the money. There might be other incentives that are rewarding. So you don't always have to think of pay in the way of physical money. A lot of things can be the experience, can be the connection, it could be to allow you to promote that work to build your brand later on. Lots of cool stuff like that. Anyway, I just wanted to mention that because it is something I want to get into later on a little bit. So look, all that being said, this is probably the longest intro ever, but let's get started. So I just got back from Century City this morning. I was out on a shoot, and this is actually something for a personal project, and I actually had to shoot the Fox Tower, which is also the Nakatomi Plaza in Die Hard. It's 471 feet tall, so a really big building, and I wanted to get this specific shot, which I need to have like an 8mm lens to get really close to actually make it a lot taller than it actually is, and also get a lot of parallax for what I was doing. And this is something that I didn't actually have any permits or anything to go shoot around there, which can be fine most of the time, but actually going on Fox Studios headquarters property and trying to shoot with like a big Blackmagic Ursa camera, I had the security there is pretty tight, and even at 7 a.m, I had them coming out kind of making a big fuss about that. But I just got back from that, which was really fun. I'm really amped up about that. I'm going to be announcing some stuff really soon about what I've been working on. It's pretty cool. But now I'm back, and I've been really anxious to get started on this episode, because this one is one that I think can benefit all of us. Now, I really think the big problem is a majority of us or artists divide the world up a little bit into like left and right brain and take pride in being more of a right brainer rather than comprehending they could actually be a little bit of both, and rather than kind of downplaying it. I think there's always, and again, I am generalizing with a lot of this, but there's definitely a lot of that elitist type thing with, let's say, programmers, where it's like, actually programmers in IT, I'll say that, it's like you take pride in what you do, but at the same time, there's a little bit of that elitist attitude in it. And at the same time, I think that artists do it as well. It's kind of funny, and again, generalizing, but more talking especially about like video games, places like that, where you have both kind of in the same environment. But you get artists who kind of take pride in not knowing that shit is how I'd probably call it. And that is that they feel like they don't know how to code or to do any of that kind of stuff, and that they're creatives and what they do is quite magical and no one else could do what they're doing. And I think that really, you take that stubbornness away and you actually accept that you're good at what you do and you're doing the best you can, but why not utilize everything you can? And I think the biggest thing, and the reason why a lot of us, I just said us, a lot of us tend to downplay that is because we don't really know where to begin, how to pick that up. And I'm just going to say that, like, I, for the longest time, wanted to code. I remember when I was probably 9 or 10, I wanted to be a video game programmer. I thought that would be really cool, making video games. I was actually having dinner with a few friends from like Scanline and Zero VFX the other night, and we kind of nerded out talking about like playing Doom and Wolfenstein back in the day, and that kind of is how I got into doing 2D and then 3D artwork, was being fascinated by the whole video game development process, especially back then when it was a lot harder to develop this stuff. There wasn't any internet or any tools available, so you had to kind of either figure it out yourself or stumble across some amazing tool that was on like a bulletin board system, or a video game magazine cover. So that was always like one of those things for me. Like, I thought I wanted to be a coder, and I actually bought a book. I actually tried to find it recently. It was something like, I don't know, game programming, whatever. I don't remember the title, but it was this big fat book. It would teach you how to make like a first person shooter. And this is back in like 93 or 94. And the thing is that, like, I was in grade 9 or not grade 9, sorry, I was probably 9 or 10 years old. So I basically did not know about equations or math or anything. And I didn't have a assembler, which I would need a compiler to actually build this code. So this was like this situation where I was basically reading it all in theory. And you're not going to retain anything just reading about it and you're not actually doing it. And that's, I think, the most valuable thing, first of all, is to make sure that you're actually putting whatever you learn to use. You're executing it, and more importantly, you're doing it for something that interests you rather than necessarily just like tutorial. I always think the best way to apply what you're doing is you go through it, you learn it, but then you go through it again, but apply it to something you're specifically doing. So that way you're learning out of context. And this could be doing a Photoshop tutorial. It doesn't need to be programming. I'm just saying, in general, I think this is the best way to learn is you do it again, but you apply it to something else that you're doing. Because if you're out of context, if you're doing it to your own thing, there's going to be other problems that come up that you wouldn't necessarily learn or run into if you're in this protected learning environment. And that's something that I really encourage everyone that I teach or mentor, is like always about, making sure you apply it to your own stuff. I'd rather see that than, applying it just to whatever scene file that I provided or whatever. So I think that's just really important to kind of think about. But from there, the reason I couldn't really pick it up was because it would refer to all these things that I had no idea about. I was learning about assembly, which is like machine code, and just all these things along the way. And it was kind of a great insight. I think it was really valuable, but it was nothing that I could retain or apply to what I was doing. And there have been multiple times down the line that I've tried to get into this. Like, I remember one of my first jobs, a buddy of mine who's one of the main soups over at Double Negative. I'm all over the place this morning. He kind of took interest in me and wrote me up this big document on programming, on scripting, and this was for 3ds Max. And he wrote this specifically for me. He spent hours on it, and it was essentially a breakdown of like all the terms and all the things you could do and where you could apply stuff. And I thought that was really amazing. I wish I still had that, but the execution for me, and I think for most people, was probably all wrong in terms of having a massive document that explains like what a bunch of terms is not really going to help you as much as finding a way to make it make sense to you. And I think that's where we all run into this issue is as artists, we don't know how to make heads or tails of a lot of the material out there. A lot of it's going to be, hello world is probably the first thing you're ever going to learn. And that's back in C or C++, you would write like a printf statement, and that would essentially print the string or print the words hello world on the screen. And from there, you kind of like build upon that and do other stuff. And none of it really kind of helps you with being an artist if you're trying to learn all these crazy things right off the bat, instead of trying to find ways to benefit you and kind of grow and learn what the programs actually think while you're doing it. So I think for me, the best and most valuable thing I learned was from one of the technical directors at Weta. And, he didn't really teach me anything other than saying to me, the best thing to do is to actually write a script or write a tool that's specifically something, because then you're actually going to grow upon that and you're going to learn, rather than trying to do it, you follow a tutorial or you follow something, it's not really going to click as much, just because you're just following whatever you're being told rather than trying to, fulfill this goal that you have in mind. So his example was in Maya to write a tool that he needed that would just display all of the lights and tell him which ones are casting shadows and which ones are not. Okay. And to me, that sounded kind of boring. I'm like, no, I want to like script particles and do all this crazy stuff. So I bought this book there's one by David Gould and the other one by, I think it's Adam something or other. And they were the two programming books for Maya at the time. And again, none of it really clicked. So for me, finally, the way that I picked it all up was basically just to kind of get into Maya and later into Max and just turn on all the verbose commands that allow you to, it allows it to tell you what it's basically. So every time you're messing around in Maya, it's actually spitting out all this code, telling you what it's doing under the hood. And I think that's for everyone, kind of like how we start, but most people don't take it further than that. They just kind of like copy and paste like one line and that's what they do. But I think it is definitely a good starting point, because if you're trying to learn to do something and you don't understand what it's doing or what it's thinking, in other words, if it's a one-way conversation, it's really intimidating and really frustrating. But if you're able to do something and it tells you, I don't know what the hell you're thinking because you said this, and then you do it again a different way, and it's like, okay, that's accepted. That's going to make a lot more sense. It's like, okay, now I'm starting to see what clicks. It's kind of like dating or anything else. If you say stupid things and get water thrown in your face, then you're like, mental note, don't do that again. But I think that with everything, if you have that back and forth, you can calibrate yourself. You can learn what works, what doesn't work. And if you don't have that, then you're just constantly going to be making mistakes and not understand how to fix them. So like I said before, I think that it's such a important thing for a lot of us where we just don't really know how to make it click. And that's why I'm actually going to be giving you guys a few different video tutorials and putting together. Unfortunately, because I'm doing so much this month, I don't have time to like go crazy in every application, but I do want to just kind of quickly put some together. I'm going to do these in Max. It's like 3ds Max, but if you use Maya, if you use Nuke, use After Effects, Photoshop now has Java support. So, I mean, whatever you're using, I'm hoping that you can kind of see the benefit in how I go about discussing a lot of this stuff. Because why I think it's so important for us to learn this stuff is more about automating what we do. Okay, as artists, we think, I don't need to know this stuff, I'm not smart enough, all those different things. And I've tested this a lot. A year ago, I actually interviewed or talked to probably about 30 different people specifically about what their background is and why they haven't tried this stuff out. And so I had guys, girls, different ages, different places, different disciplines, just so I can try and see, where the commonalities are in terms of why they haven't tried the code. And then I went and built some basic exercises and said, go do this. And then literally a couple of hours later, there was a lot of people coming back saying, I would never in a million years would have thought I would be able to do this. But here I am, not only able to do this stuff, but now I'm actually trying to write my own script to solve a problem with what I'm doing at work. And to me, that was really fulfilling to kind of see that success and also that shift in mindset for a lot of people. At the same time, that was something that allowed me to kind of see what works and what isn't working. And I think for a lot of us, it's about, you start to think about what your process is as an artist. Let's say if you're in 3D, it's like, okay, I'm going to go make this sphere, and then I'm going to scale it. I'm going to put this shader on it, and then apply a bunch of modifiers or effectors or something to it to get a certain result. And if you're able to kind of look at the process you go through and then break it down into step by step, like how do I make a sphere? How do I apply that shader? How do I do this? And that's something that I've taught a few times. I think in the mentorship, the very first lesson, and it's because I wanted to be mentorship. Initially, a little bit about programming, and then we get into doing like a lot of really heavy-duty film effects and stuff like that. But I wanted to show an exercise on how to build an asteroid. Okay, it's like how to build like a detailed rock. And so what we would do as artists is we'd go and we would model the rock. We would go through all the steps and build this really cool detailed rock. And then I would keep that there, but I would then go through the same steps we did, but I would do it coding. So we would create the rock, we would modify it, we'd apply the shaders, the displacement, we do all this stuff. So we go through and we recreate exactly the same steps we did as an artist, but now using code instead. And it isn't that big a deal. It's pretty straightforward to do. From there, it's like, okay, well, now that we've built this with code, what if we want to randomize some of this stuff? So that way, we can expose these parameters into an interface and then basically make it so that way every time we hit the button, it generates an individual rock, unlike the other one. So initially, we just started out with one asteroid that's animating, and then we were able to generate 100,000 of them. Every single one of them is different, and they're all animating slightly different rotations and everything else. And it's all about taking one concept and then repeating it, and then making certain variables dynamic, so that way they might be random or user input, so you can actually put in the values you want. Okay, so I like to look at it like Photoshop. You've got actions, and actions are really powerful, but there are limitations with, because you're essentially hitting record and then going through your steps, and once you've captured it all, you hit stop, and it's captured every step that you did, so that way you hit a button and it'll do it over and over. But what if your process was, and maybe you can do this, I've never actually tried, but like saving your file, but like with a different name based on the size of the image or whatever input. You could go through all your actions when it comes to saving the file and saving it a very specific way. Maybe that's something that you're not able to change, because that's something that needs to go a little bit beyond that. But if you're scripting it, you could go through and record all those steps, but then you could say, okay, based on the image size, I want you to save it out with this file name, and then I also want to do these other things that are a little advanced beyond that. And it's just taking one concept and building upon that. So for me, as an artist, I really like the idea of being able to walk in, sit down, and do some work. And the bit of work that I do is all that I need. It's not wasted. It's not like I'm going in and doing all this like mundane tasks that are part of the process because I need to. I like to look at everything I do, and if I can automate it, I'll automate each section of it. And the bit that I'm doing is actually the bit that, as a creative person, I need to do myself. Whereas everything else, I'm hoping at some point I've built a button to do that. And I've got so many tools now that there's times when I jump on a project and I literally just click several buttons in sequence, and then I'm able to kind of step away, let it do its thing. I come back, I review my shot, and then do it again. And I really like that idea of being able to come in, I hit those buttons, and it spits out like a QuickTime video. And then from there, I'm able to kind of review it and take it further, make the tweaks, and hit another button, it does it again. And there's been so many times where that's kind of saved my butt, being able to do that. I did a short film with some friends of mine about 2 years ago now. It's called Flight. So that year I actually worked on 2 projects that were called Flight. This one was a short film. It's got like the Vimeo staff pick, won some awards and everything. And the other one was the Denzel Washington, Robert Zemeckis Flight. And so with the short film, because the budget was so small for doing this, I spoke with the producer and everyone, and I basically told them what I need to do it. And the whole idea was that there's this like parkour stunt guy who's just going around doing crazy flips and cool stuff. And we want to add these kind of like trails coming with the shoes and everything else. So they were going to match move the shoes. And the shots, I think that was probably about 20 something shots. What I suggested was that they track it all, but they name everything correctly. So each shoe, the environment, everything is named very selectively and very specific. So once they've done that, I did look dev on 2 different shots, and I would talk with Josh and John, the directors of the film, and I would basically say, like, how's this look? We go back and forth in the 2 shots. I wanted to do 2 rather than 1 because different situations, the look might change slightly. So I wanted to kind of really lock it down in those 2 situations. So having done the look dev on 2 shots, once we were pretty happy with how things look. Meanwhile, the match move was being done for the 2 shoes and the environment, the cameras and everything else. I basically set everything up so that way I built the look and I kind of built that into a scene file. And I was able to get all the scene files from the match mover and then bring it in, hit a button, and what it would do is it would split the scene file up into several scene files. It would mat everything out, set it all up for rendering, create all the folders and everything so that way it knew where to save everything. And then it would actually go and get all of my effects, and it would create each 3D file for every single render pass, and then it would fire out those scene files to the farm to start simulating. And once those things are finished simulating, it would bring it all back in from every single one of those different 3D files and bring all the effects into one master file, and it would then break that up into multiple render passes, spit all those render passes out onto the farm, render it all, and then put that all automatically into a nuke file, comp it, and give me back a QuickTime. Okay, so that sounds insane, but this to me was a pretty insane thing. I wanted to automate all of this so that way the first time I actually open a scene file and do any actual work, I've already got the file finished, rendered, comped, and I'm reviewing it for the first time. And this pretty much changed how I worked forever after that, because it meant that I could review what I'm doing. And this is a bit more specific to effects, okay? But like most of the time when we're doing effects, we don't really get to see what we're doing until we simulate it and render it. And for me, it meant that I'm sitting kind of in dailies, or my version of dailies, sitting in front of the QuickTime and reviewing it, but I'm able to look at it and say, okay, there's clipping here, this thing's too fast, make my little notes, and I can go in and adjust the scene files, hit a button, and it goes through that simulate, assemble, render, comp, and spit out a QuickTime process again. And it meant that most of the time I could get shots approved either on version 2 or version 3. And version 1 never gets seen by anyone, it's just specifically for me. So it meant that pretty much version 1 that I would show anyone, most of the time it got approved, or there'd be some minor comments coming back. Now that's not always going to be the case, but for me it meant that I was able to limit the amount of interaction I had with the shot to specifically jumping in and making the changes that I wanted to do to the shot, and the rest of the time the computers and everything else is doing it all for me. And it just allowed me to free up my time to work on more, to get more done, rather than it being like me in, management hell trying to manage 20 different shots and different versions and try and get it all done. A lot of times when we work on bigger productions, usually the lead or the supervisor might build a certain shot, and that's kind of like the style that they want. And then from there, you get all the juniors who would come in and they just kind of get that rig, and they would then build that for all the other shots. They would just tweak a few parameters and that's it. But the thing is that you're still stuck probably babysitting a lot of those shots. If you don't have the juniors working on it, then you're doing that task yourself. When you could actually automate a lot of this, so that way you build the look and then you give that tool that you've developed for that specific effect to the juniors or whatever, and they're able to actually work with that to get the look that they want, rather than you managing all this stuff yourself. So you create an effect or you create a shot, and then you wrap that into an effects tool, and you're able to kind of take that further. I always look at Maya, 3ds Max, whatever you're working with. Like, if you can imagine working in a tool that was specifically developed for you and for that specific project you're working on, rather than there being this tool that's developed for everyone on the planet, this piece of software was written specifically for you to go work on Blade or something like that. Okay, I'm going to use that as a good analogy, like Blade. You're doing Blade 4 and you got to kill all the vampires and do all that kind of ashing type effects. Now, imagine if you did open the 3D package of your choice and it was written specifically for that task. And it was written specifically for you and how you work. If you could imagine how much work you would get done being in that context, okay, that The buttons are all in the right place. There's a button that sets your shot up for you. There's a button that creates the effect. Then, you got to tweak things a little bit. And then the preparation, the simming, the rendering, the lighting phases, and then getting all the assets out to other people. All those things, there's a button for that as well. That's exactly what I'm trying to talk about here. It's about if you were able to think ahead and start to develop these tools, which don't take that long to actually do. But if you're able to actually do that, then you're literally just there kind of, I'm going to use this analogy, which I hate, but like Minority Report or something, twisting some dials and it's all happening for you and you don't need to worry about much. Like you just hit the right buttons and you got this custom interface perfectly made for what you do. One of the biggest things that I hear people talk about is that they don't have time. Like I polled a few hundred people about this and I said, what are the reasons that you code? And one person said that the only time they would ever need to script or write a script is when they really need something done. And, at the 11th hour. And that's exactly when they don't have time to spend hours writing a script. And the thing is, I've been in that exact situation so many times. And that's exactly why I choose to write a script instead, because it might take me 30 minutes to write, a script or a tool that will get what I need done, and it will save me hours and hours of time. And I've been in this situation so many times where that's exactly what happened. I only have 20 minutes to get something done, so I quickly jump in, start coding something up, and then it gets the task done. So I think the whole procrastination about not having enough time is bullshit, because it doesn't take days or weeks or whatever. Some things can, but like for a lot of things, this is where the use really kind of kicks in. Like I remember working on Transformers 3, and we got to a point where I'd been developing this look of these characters being kind of destroyed by the Decepticons and they kind of get vaporized, and we were spending a lot of time on this trying to develop this look, and I developed it, and there was about 16 render elements that would need to be made to demonstrate this. And we actually had 16 characters running through the shot. The studio I was working with, I guess they had named every character. I was asking them about this. I was saying like, why is this guy called Rudy, and why is this one, do you just come up with random names or what? And it turns out like every single one of those people that were being shot in this sequence were actually people they'd worked with at some point, at their previous studio, and they hated, so they named every single character in the sequence after these different people. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But what ended up happening was that I developed this look, and we were really happy with it, and we went to Digital Domain, and we showed the look, and they were like, look, this looks kind of cool, but we're not going to make any comments until we see it on every single character. So if you've got 16 elements and you've got 16 characters running around, that's 256 render elements that you've got to make. And the thing is, that wasn't like me making a bunch of render passes like spec or use or whatever. It was Fume Effects sims, Krakatoa caches, dynamic sims, like all these different things for each render pass. So they're all unique elements, and each one of them might have all the render elements that come with it, like the spec and everything else. So as you can imagine, it's a lot that would need to get done. And so this thing, it took me about a week. Once I'd locked down the look of it, it took me about a week to generate all that stuff, by hand for that one character. And then to do it for all the characters, we decided we had about 3 days to turn that around for all the characters' feedback. So I would need to manually set up, rig, and simulate and render and light and everything else, 256 elements, just so I could show it to DD just to get feedback, and then tweak it all again after that. And I made that decision about it was a late afternoon, and I made the decision, okay, well, I've got to get this basically simming and everything by tomorrow morning. And I think it must have been 2 days, because I had basically 24 hours to get it all turned around. And that was like a near impossible thing where it's like, okay, I'm not going to sleep between now and tomorrow morning. And I had to make a decision. Do I do it by hand, which maybe I'm going to get it done, maybe not. But either way, it's going to be a lot of freaking work to get that done. Or do I try and write a tool, like a script, to do it? And I wasn't the most proficient scripter or programmer. Like I basically had written some basic tools by that stage, nothing really ambitious. And so for me to make this decision, it was a huge risk, because I figured this thing, basically creating like all these different processes, it definitely was a big tool to make. And for me to go and do that, it was a big risk, because what if I don't do it? Like, what if I try and like 3 in the morning or 4 in the morning, I hit that wall and I'm like, it's not going to work, then I'm screwed. I'm absolutely screwed, because now I don't have enough time to get the shot done. So this was one of those big moments where, I'd already been running myself rampant trying to get all this stuff done for Transformers. We had very little time, and then I had to build like 256 elements. Some had to go through multiple processes of being simulated and rendered and everything else as well. So it wasn't just like build it and render it. So I will say this, like, I've never written a script where I couldn't do it. Like, I never hit a wall, how to do it. Every time I write a script, I don't know how to do it, but that's kind of part of the process, is figuring it out along the way. And so I just want to mention that, because going into this, I was pretty sure I wouldn't be able to do it as well. And I just want you to be aware of that, because I want everyone else to realize that I'm in the same boat. Like, anytime I try something, I don't know how the hell I'm going to do it, but you just break it down into tasks and you go from there. So one of the big things was that I had all the characters and I knew what frame they were going to get killed, and I basically had to figure out the direction they're going to get shot, and from there which way they'd blow out, all these different things. So what I ended up doing was I basically just named each of the point cache characters Rudy _52 or whatever it is, and that way each character had a name and it had a number as well in it, and so that way I knew which frame they're going to get killed and which characters. So that way and what class they're going to be. I then built the effect for each and every one of those effects. So I basically just got my original files and I stripped it all down to the core asset of what it needs. So one might be like a big kind of ash blast, one might be cloth sim, another one might be a fume effects element, one might be fire or whatever it's. And I would strip it down to just the basic stuff for it. And then finally, there were a lot of like nodes that I needed that were very specific to each character. So one would control the direction, one might control the spread, one controls the position. So I would get those things and I would break that out to another file. So what I ended up having was one file which had the character, one file which had like essentially all the rig elements, all the nodes or locators or whatever it's going to be, that controls everything for that character or for that effect. And finally, I had another scene file for each one of those effects. So I had all the effects, I had the rig, and then I had all the characters. And finally, at like 4 in the morning, I think it was, I got to the point where I'd written the script, I had not run it, and this thing would get the scenes, it would essentially get the scene, it would get each character, and sorry for such a long story here, but I'm getting to a point here, but it would get the character, would then save out an individual file for, let's say, Rudy, and it would get the number and it would know what frame that it's all happening on. It would then bring in the rig and it would snap it to that one character, so that way it controlled the direction and everything at the position the character's killed. It would then bring in one at a time effect that to assemble, and it would then rig the whole thing together and save out a file. And then that file, it would create all the directories, it would path it all, it would fire out a simulation to the farm, it would fire out all the render elements that it generate as well, and then make that dependent on the sim. So once the sim's done, the caches are all created, it would bring it in and do the next phase, it created the whole hierarchy. And then it would go back and it would do it for the next character, and it would do the same thing again. So this is one of those moments at 4 in the morning, it's like, am I screwed or is this going to work? And there's nothing more nerve-wracking than like nervously hitting the button and praying that something's going to happen. And then bit by bit, I'd see this directory start filling up with 3D files, of Rudy this pass, Rudy that pass, and then Bill or George or whatever the next guy is. And so I ended up with 256 3D files. But of course, that mightn't mean anything. Maybe every single 3D file is identical and it was all wrong. But I opened them all up and holy crap, they're all working. So suddenly, I went from this took me a week to assemble, and I felt like it would take me weeks to get those 16 characters done, to I now have a tool that I built in a couple of hours. It's pretty big and robust. But now whenever I need to make changes, I just do that to the master file, hit a button, and it generates everything for me. The whole thing is automated. And the next step of that was like, do I actually tell everyone that I have this button, or do I just, keep it to myself and I've got this magic tool that saves me weeks of work and I can just go home and like watch Netflix instead of working? So that was like a big eye opener for me, was like automating this process, which was huge for Transformers. and being able to get all this stuff done that otherwise I never in a million years would have thought that I would be able to do. And instead I'd be manually needing to go through, create these steps. And I think the most powerful thing of learning to automate everything is to eliminate human error. So in other words, when you're working on things, and I'm sure no matter whether you're in Photoshop or anything else, at the 11th hour, when you're so stressed and you're trying to get stuff done, that's when you start making mistakes. You might overwrite files, you might save the thing in the wrong place or call it the wrong thing. It's so easy to make all these fundamental mistakes along the way. And by automating everything, it means that it's very, very difficult for something to be done wrong, because the automation is protecting you from ever actually making those mistakes, because it's saving everything correctly. So I rely on it very heavily. I've gotten to a point where I don't really load Max files, I don't save Max files, and I don't create directories or anything. Everything's automated for me where, I hit version up, it changes it from version 1 to version 2, and it also changes my render output path to version 2. It makes the directory for that. It sets it all up, so I'm never having to manually go in and save stuff, because that's the worst thing in the world. Is like you save something and then later you're going to send it to the compositor and the directory is empty. It's like, where did I save that file to? It was late at night, I was really stressed. What did I do with that file? Like, where is it? I'm sure it's saved. Or worse yet, you overwrite the same file again, or 100 other things that could go wrong. So, having this layer of protection allows you to avoid ever making mistakes at all. Now, one of my friends, he's a senior animator over at Weta. I remember he, as an artist, was getting into programming, and it was a really great example where he didn't think he would ever need it. He's a freaking animator, but suddenly he's writing tools to help him automate a lot of his tasks, make animating a lot easier, tweak his curves, copy keys across, and manage a lot of what he's doing. And it just meant, but bit by bit, the more he got confident and competent in automating this stuff, the more he could work as an animator and free up his time. And I really like the whole concept of that, because like I said before, I want to think that most of what I do, I can probably do an 80-20 analysis on. In other words, 80% of what I'm doing is probably not needed. That could be automated. And the 20% that I'm doing is actually the most important part, and that's the part that I need that probably makes up 80% of the work. So in other words, that 20% that requires me to be creative and put in what only I can do, or me as a human do, makes up 80% of the work. Whereas, the other 80% is probably stuff that could be automated. And once you've automated it, it makes life so much easier. Pretty much every project I work on now, I build a set of tools specific for that project. And it means that I can get my artists to do what I'm doing without me having to physically do it myself. They've got tools that are built to create most of what they're doing and work more efficiently, work faster, work more cost effectively, which is really great. Even working remotely, I worked on Equalizer, another Denzel movie, and I put out a talk about this called From Boston to LA, and basically talking about pipeline and automation. And what I did is simply using Dropbox and a few other tools, I was able to work remotely and do most of the production work, and I love that. Where when I was working in Boston on the movie, because that's where we were shooting it, we didn't have any real hardware or licenses to do most of the work, whereas I had my studio back in LA and I had a render farm and everything else there. So what I ended up doing was I built some basic tools, which meant that I was able to work in Boston, hit a button, and it would transfer everything to LA. And not only that, but LA, my whole studio pipeline is completely different to the one in Boston. So it would change the directory, the pathing to all the links, the naming of everything, and then it would submit everything to farm, and it would render or sim everything, and then get all that stuff, and then transfer it back to Boston again, back with Boston's naming conventions and everything else. So, I was able to automate it all where I felt like I was on my network or able to use my tools, but I was actually able to do it all from a whole other studio. And, once I was back in LA, I was able to work within my own pipeline, my own workflow, but then hit a button and it would connect through a VPN and publish all the assets in the right location every time that the compositors would be looking in, and everything would be named correctly. And it would feel like as if I'm working within their pipeline where they know exactly where everything's going to be. They don't even need to ask me because it's all exactly where it needs to be. And that would all jump into Shotgun and publish everything for me as well. So that was just really powerful, having that kind of automation. And I remember working on another project. It was Witches of East End, I think it was. And basically it's a big promo for that. It was a lot of fun to work on, but I had to go back to Australia for a little bit, and I was actually managing multiple shows. We're doing Need for a few other big projects, and what I ended up doing is I had my MacBook Pro, which I was actually working in 3ds Max, and a Mac cannot run unless using Boot Camp. It can't even run Macs. So I was in my hotel in Australia, and I was able to work on shots using just Log Me In. So I was using remote desktop software where I was able to work really slowly in 3D. But most of the time I was just tweaking shots so that they might come back with comments like make the fire bigger or whatever, change this effect. So I would just go into 3D through this remote desktop. I would tweak a few things and I would hit a button, and then I basically would be able to review it on my end. And by having all these tools written, it made my life easy, because what ended up happening was that I would load a file, I would load the latest file, and I would tweak those couple of values that I needed, like make the fire bigger. Okay, I'll make the fuel burn a little bit slower, and I'll make the fuel more expansive based on the heat. So change these two values. I would then hit a button which would version it from version 5 to version 6. I would hit submit, and it would submit everything to the farm. So it would split out all my render passes and sim passes, do all that stuff that I mentioned. But the best part is, it would, once it finished rendering it all on deadline, you could use Backburner or whatever you wanted to use, but once it had finished doing that, it would load up Nuke, and it would composite what I had made into a QuickTime with all the slated information, and it would Dropbox it into today's date. It would automatically build all the folders, and that would sync with my laptop. So it meant that I might jump in 3D for literally 60 seconds, tweak a few values, hit a button, and close the remote desktop down. But on my Mac, I would have the QuickTimes local appear like a few minutes later or a few hours later, and I could double click them and watch them. And it meant that, I'm not needing to go in and save up a new version, change the render output paths, make all these different folders, because you're doing it all remotely. It's laggy, it's slow, it's pretty painful. And then, once it's all done, log back in, create a nuke comp, render it all out, and then go in and copy the file across to a network or email myself, whatever. None of that stuff. And, I just clicked 3 buttons and it's done. And it meant that my workflow was able to manage multiple shows at once. And the more I've done this, the more my workflow meant that I can manage 5 projects at once rather than managing one and having to go through all these kind of grunt tasks that I shouldn't need to worry about. So for me, it's definitely changed how I worked, and it meant that I could be in Australia, or I could be on the beach, I could be anywhere, and get most of what I need to get done by a few clicks, and then having it all synchronized back to me. I can review it all, and that was my process. I would do it, I would hit those buttons, and then I would be able to play it in real time locally on my machine, full screen, and look at it all, and then say, okay, that was good, I need to tweak a few more things, log in, tweak it, hit a button, review it again on my end, and then if I'm happy with it, I have a publish button which I could do on either end, and it would essentially contact the client with a link to where everything's located, and it would do all that automatically. And by building all these tools, which all come out of necessity, it's more about, I need something, I go and I do it, and later on I need another thing and I go and do it, and after a while I've got all these steps, and I could literally wrap that into another tool, which all it does is it runs 5 lines which calling functions that do bigger stuff, and the whole thing is done for me. And that meant, like I said before, that I could work on multiple jobs at once. So that meant that for me, I tend to work from home or from my studio, and it means when I have projects come in, I can actually manage so much myself, because I'm doing that 20% that I need to do, and the other 80% that usually is the most time consuming and where you're making the most mistakes and having to wait around, that's all automated. I don't need to worry about it. And that has changed my life, my whole perspective completely, just being able to automate everything that I do. Now, I mention this not to try and show off or anything. I'm just more trying to really communicate the importance of this stuff. And that's why I'm hoping some of these things are oh yeah, I'm always rendering stuff, and it's accidentally override an old version or get something wrong. The minor details that we shouldn't need to worry about are usually what bites you in the butt later on. And I think these days it's really powerful to have that knowledge as well. Whether you are a modeler, whether you're an animator, I think these can all really benefit. I remember when I had my first kind of like job interview with ILM, that was one of the first questions they asked. Like all the supervisors were like, so what languages do you program in? And for me, I was able to say, okay, well, I don't know Python, but I know enough about it that I know MaxScript is very similar structural wise that I'd be able to pick up Python pretty quick and, kind of take that conversation from there. So that was years ago now, but I thought it was really interesting the fact that they were asking me that right away. It wasn't like, what tools do you know? It's like they were actually specifically saying like, what do you code in? Not everywhere you go, you're gonna need the code, but especially as a technical director, is definitely gonna help you. And even one of the best producers I've ever worked with, and this is going back about 15 years, but I was trying to solve a 3D issue. I was animating for a commercial. I couldn't get the animation curves exactly right. And I remember 8 o'clock at night or whatever, he came to my desk and I was explaining to him how I'm having this like big issue with trying to get a Bezier curve to basically curve exactly how I wanted. And I still to this day do not know how he did this, but he basically pulled out a calculator and just punched in a bunch of numbers. And then he said, what if, let's say it's like a 150 frame sequence. He's like, what if you put a keyframe at frame 350 at that value on your animation curve? And it caused the Bezier curve to bend exactly how it needed to. And like I said, to this day, I still have no idea how he managed to figure that out. But the one thing I did learn later on is that this producer, he actually was a programmer for a while before he got into producing. And by far, he was the number one producer at our company. Like whenever we had reviews, or whenever the producers had reviews, the feedback from all the artists and every creative in the company was always like, can every other producer be like Mark because he's just doing everything right? And that also goes in the fact that he was the one producer where I worked back in the day that was really caring about the artists as well. He'd always ask, what do you need? Can I get you a coffee? Can I do whatever it takes to get the productions done? It wasn't about like having a big power trip about where's my stuff. It was more about what can I do on my end to get you to get the stuff done. So that I always thought was really fascinating though, was just the fact that he came from programming and now as a producer, it actually allowed him to kind of interject in the conversations a lot more than most other producers. Like let's say we came in at 10 o'clock in the morning and the client came in at 9 o'clock. I remember seeing like producers and clients sitting at someone's desk waiting for them to get in because they don't know how to load up a image sequence to show the client. So they need the artist to come in just to demonstrate that. Whereas, Mark Webb was the only producer at the time who actually would pay attention to what an artist is doing. And because of that, he knew how to load like 3ds Max and load up the RAM player and load a sequence, really basic stuff. But I guess for some others who weren't 3D savvy, it was just kind of a whole other thing. But that's what I'm getting at, is just automating everything can really, really change the way that you work. So I'm sure for a lot of us, like we're kind of like, okay, great, that's awesome, Alan. Like I see how it benefits you, but like, how do you actually how do you learn this stuff? Because I think the biggest thing, first of all, is that if you go Google, like, how do I do this, or any tutorials on scripting, most of the time, right away, the content specifically is written for programmers. So because of that, it really alienates a lot of us. And that's why I'm going to include some training at the end of this podcast that you guys can do, or at least watch over and kind of get a general gist about. But I think the most important thing is figure out a task that you're doing a lot, or you find that you're constantly repeating, and try to automate that. And don't do anything really ambitious right away, like, okay, well, I'm going to have it animate my shots and build everything for me. But like, just think about something simple. Like I said, my friend Malcolm over at Weta, he mentioned reading the scene and seeing what lights in the scene have shadows and what don't. Pretty simple, but just something that actually interests you, that could benefit you. So one of the examples I'm pretty sure I'm going to include was just how to actually save out your scene file and have your script then read the scene file to figure out what version it is and everything, and create your render output and your render directory for you automatically. Because I figure that that's something useful for a lot of us, is if you hit a button and it automatically builds the directory paths for you, so you don't need to manually go in and do that yourself. That's going to be pretty damn useful. And more importantly, from there, it's a matter of like, once you figure out a task, you figure out like what you want, then it's a matter of going and doing it. But pen and paper, just write down the steps that it took you to do it. Okay, so let's say in that case, to create a render directory, and to change to the render output path and to read the version of your file. Again, I'm having to verbally describe this, but in that situation, like picture you're doing that. What do you need to do to actually get it done? You might need to go to your render directory, click where you're rendering to, and specify the path. Along the way, you might need to make make the directory. And on top of that, you need to have it read your scene file to figure out like what version you're using. So pretty basic, but like in a situation like that, you figure out the steps required. And one by one, you tackle those things. How do I make a directory? Okay, well, let me look in the documentation because that's a pretty specific thing. But every 3D package has usually really thorough documentation. So you'd look at that, and maybe it's simply a command like make dir, like make directory, make dir. So knowing that, you then have an input, and it would say all this in the documentation, but you would say, okay, let me go into the script listener thing and type in make dir, and then I'll put in a string, which is just a text input. So in other words, I'll put in the path. And, it sounds so complicated, then it's like, oh, really? That's all I need to do is type in make dir and then the path? But then like, let me figure out, how to read the version so I can version up one. Okay, so I need to read the scene file. So how do I go and read that scene file? How do I then put that information into the renderer so it changes where it's saving it out to? It's pretty much 3 steps to get that done. Like read the scene file to figure out the version, then make the directory and where you want to save it to, and then tell the renderer to save to that location. Okay, so 3 steps. You could do it in 3 lines or 4 lines of code. Really straightforward. But then every single time you're working, you can hit a button and you never need to go and manually set up your render path ever again. And it means you're probably never going to accidentally overwrite an old version or anything like that. So I like that concept, and like there's so many different ways that I automate everything I do. And it's just a matter of breaking those down into what am I doing a lot of right now. Like I remember in Halo, it's a really simple example, but there's like this big space battle which because of time we didn't have time to actually build it as like a big crowd system, but so it was all hand animated. And what ended up happening was that the director came on and the client Microsoft came on and said, we want to change the ships so that way they're more of this type of ship and not all these different types of ship. So that meant that like we would need to get the animation for several hundred ships and copy it all over to this brand new ship. And that would be a lot of work. So, and I think it was due later on that day as well. So what I ended up doing was I just literally built like a really simple script, but it would get the ship that we needed to distribute onto all the other ones. And it would then read the object names of everything to figure out which ship is which. And what it would do is it would then copy the keys from one object to the next for like 800 different objects, and then delete the old ones or hide them or whatever. And it was just one of these things where I basically am able to write a really simple thing, but it would then transfer and save this massive headache of changing every single object, 800 different spaceships, into a completely different ship. Now, obviously, if I had built it with a particle system or had done something like that, then you could probably just change the instance geo, but it was just one of those situations where it was all hand animated. But yeah, I mean, whatever the situation might be, that was one where I knew it was going to be a lot of grunt work to do, and I knew it would take me a long time to do, and I knew if I did it as a script, I could probably do it in about 20 minutes, whereas it would take me hours and hours and hours, and I'd probably make some mistakes along the way. I'd think it's all finished, but there's some glitch because I'm doing it by hand, and I knew as a script, there's less likely going to be anything that's actually going to go wrong. So finally, one other observation I made was that I've worked at a lot of different places, and I remember back in about 2005, I'd worked at a lot of big studios, and I made this comparison with myself where I'd worked for Blur Studio, and I'd worked for Frantic Films, and I'd also worked for and each studio, I thought, like those 3, I thought were really great examples, especially back then. I think that they've all changed a lot since then. Obviously, Frantic Films is now Prime Focus and completely different company, but Blur back then, it's not the case now, but Blur back then was pretty much like whatever it takes to get something done. So when you finish a render pass, you might hop on like your scooter and scoot over to the next person's desk and say, hey, the file's in this location, and they go and load it up, they'd render their stuff out, and they yell across the room, it's done, and that's how everything was getting done. It was very much like whatever it takes to get it done. Whereas I worked at DD, which was completely automated. The whole idea was to avoid human error. It was like automate everything. And I thought that was interesting because, again, it meant that there were no mistakes. Everything was exactly where it needed to be. It was a really interesting workflow, but I found that it really slowed everything down because you had to step through or jump through so many more hoops to get something done because it needed to be built a very specific way. And I remember there were times where I would go and build something like on Blade, there's a shot where he jumps out a window and all the glass breaks. And I did that with a certain piece of software. And they're like, well, we only use this software here. Like, I was using particle flow for breaking glass. And they're like, no, we use thinking particles for all of our stuff. So, the director saw it and the shot had been approved, at least for temp delivery. But I was basically told, like, no, you got to go back and redo the shot now in TP because that's what we use. And, for me, it was just this, hair-pulling situation where you were just taking it kind of too far, in my opinion, where it's got to be done a very specific way. But everything there was very automated. The whole process was very automated. And then I worked with Frantic Films, which, at the time was my favorite studio by far. I still am really fond of the guys there, like Chris Bond, who since then founded ThinkBox Software, and they've build all these amazing tools. Their company was very big on software development. They had like all these amazing programmers working for them. They had Boris Petrov or Bobo, who was an amazing scripter and programmer. Just a really amazing amount of people. And they also had a lot of really amazing artists. And I thought it was the perfect relationship where basically, you would have artists doing what they're doing, but then you would have like all these programmers building software around that. So rather than entirely automating everything or entirely doing it more like whatever it takes to get it done, they kind of had the perfect unison where they would do things and do whatever it takes to get it done. But if they hit a wall, they would build over that wall rather than like, okay, let's go back and build a better solution going in a different path, or let's just like, smash through that wall and, we'll do it all messily. It's just, instead it was about building tools to automate whatever needed to be done or building tools to make things easier for the artist. And I thought it was just like a really great comparison of like what works, what doesn't work. And there wasn't like a surefire solution for either one of them. But for me, I just noticed that it was definitely the most beneficial was to kind of have that unison of both the creative side of the company and also the technical side of the company. And then you get some artists who kind of started to learn to code and do all that. And that was one thing I loved at Digital Dimension, actually. Like a couple of the guys who are now over on Independence Day 2, actually, like Marion Spates and a few other ones. Like when I work with those guys, they're doing The Last Samurai back in 2003. And I thought it was really cool that like Jason Crosby, Marion Spates, and I think also Justin Mitchell, who's one of the soups at Scanline, they were all doing, or I know at least Marion and Jason were both doing math class at night. So they were all learning to get better at math. And Marion wanted to do that because he wanted to learn to write shaders and kind of automate a lot of stuff. And I think that probably benefited him down the line a lot, especially when he got into Massive and using other tools. So I just think that like, most of the guys guys and girls who have met and worked with are really amazing at what they do. Not all of them, but there is a surprising amount who have actually learned code in some form and fashion over the years. And I think it's just a real game changer once you start to get into it. So I know for me, this is kind of an episode. It's more about examples or whatever of why you should do it rather than it being some kind of like, let me teach you to code in a podcast. But that's also why I figured I would provide some examples as well. Like I said, if I had more time, I would actually build a few for different ones. So you could learn a little bit of scripting in After Effects, a little bit of scripting in Nuke, a little bit of scripting in Max and Maya. But I'm just going to give a couple of videos which I think just kind of really demonstrate the idea and the concept really well. And then from there, like if you have specific questions, email me. I'll do my best to reply. I know December is going to be one of those months for me, but I'll do my best to help you out. And there are plenty of really good resources. I'll try and link to a few in here. But like I said, I think that most of us give up because we just don't really kind of find the context that it works, that it all makes sense to us. And that's why for me, once I had figured out my way that worked, in other words, kind of deconstructing what I'm doing in 3D and then kind of like building upon that and then kind of expanding from there, it made it all click. Whereas before I tried multiple times where I'd try and look through documentation and they'd say, okay, well, this is a Boolean and this is 0.3 and this is this and this, and getting to equations and everything else, it just didn't really make sense. But if you learn some of the basics, like what a loop is, in other words, getting something and making it do it several times over, that's a great start. And then from there, it's like, okay, well, how do I randomize something? How do I build an interface for this? That way I just have this cool little button that does like everything I need. One thing I'm going to demonstrate, I was hoping to have it done by Christmas, but I'm going to demonstrate early next year, is I put out some training in May, and this was on something from the Mentorship. It's just a portion of one of the lessons, but it was like, I don't know, 15 hours or something of training on how to build like a whole vampire pipeline. So going through generating all the fire, all the dynamics, going through all these concepts, as well as rendering it all out, compositing it all. And it was a pretty long lesson. Like the actual full lesson from inside the mentorship program is something ridiculous. It's a big lesson. It's like 20 something hours. So what I thought would be really cool is like once you go through this like really over the top thing, going through an entire creature effects pipeline and how to build realistic characters burning up and breaking apart into ash and crumbling on the ground and rendering it all and building all the additional render passes. I wanted to just build a tool and demonstrate that tool where you click the character, you type in, when you want it to start, when you want it to end for the fire, a couple of other values you want, like how much detail goes into the simulation. So you do all that in 15 seconds, hit a button, and watch as it starts to construct, just like Transformers, all of the max files and starts to simulate and render and cache and reconstruct and render and split up all the render passes and composite and then spit out the final result and build all of that so that way it's automated. That's something I wanted to do, where I thought it would be really cool to basically build a tool, a 3D tool that looks identical to every other one in Maya or Max or whatever you're using. So that way, just like the same way that you might create a teapot, or you might create, a noise modifier or something that makes something bend, you could click a character and tell it to do something that's, feature film worthy. You hit a button and watch the whole thing get constructed for you. And it's not about getting something that you don't need to ever do 3D ever again. It's more about, like I said, taking 80% of the process that you don't need to do yourself and automating that. And then from there, the 20% that you need to be the artist, you can come in and say, okay, this looks cool, but I want the fire to last a bit longer, and I want it to spread a bit quicker over the body. The chunks that break up, they're a little bit too even. I want to have some bigger and a lot smaller, or, I want it to bounce more on the ground. Whatever you want to do, you just quickly go in there and dial in those changes afterwards, because everything's already set up, everything's constructed, and you don't need to do all that yourself ever again. So I like the idea of creating that tool, and then from there, let's say I'm doing a movie like that, I can hire a team of junior or mid-level artists, and I can get them to go and do the 50, 60, 150 shots that we need to get done using the tool that I've constructed, rather than me doing it all myself or hiring a bunch of seniors who are going to cost an arm and a leg to go and build all these shots. And that way the consistency and everything else is exactly the same through and through, because everyone's working with the same tools. So that's what I mean about building software. So that way, it's as if Maya or Max or Houdini, whatever you're using, was specifically written for you to get this task done. And that's where the real power comes in. So, this has been, one of those episodes that I'm hoping kind of inspires you guys. At the same time, it does require you to kind of get off your butt and start to seek out like how this is going to benefit you now. But I'm hoping that it at least has kind of inspired you a little bit as to how you can take advantage of this. Now, I have included some training, and if you go to the show notes, so www.alanmckay.com/51, there'll be a link to it there. Or if you directly want to go and jump right into the videos, just go to alanmckay.com/51download. So 51 download, and that will be a direct link to the training. So this is something I'm going to be putting up with the lesson. And these are a couple of videos I've recorded that will go through just kind of some basic concepts and just kind of hopefully give you some examples. And if I'm going to be recording them in 3ds Max, but if you're using Maya or whatever else, I actually learned all this stuff from Maya. I was using Mel, and these days Python is definitely the tool of choice. It's the universal language that every software uses. MaxScript is pretty similar to it in a lot of ways, at least on the surface. So that all being said, hopefully this can at least give you some ideas. And if you want, I'm going to put some links in there as well as to other training, but that might benefit you. But, you know, if you have specific questions, maybe I can help out. Like I know in the mentorship, this is something that I teach everyone because I think it's such a great negotiation tool as well. Like if you can code, you know, if you're applying for a job and there's one person who's a lighting artist, they're really good, and there's another person who's a lighting artist, but they can also write their own tools and automate a lot of their own workflow and possibly build tools that other people can use as well. Like, who do you think is probably going to have the upper advantage here? Okay, like I definitely think it's a great negotiation tool. Having the ability to code and everything will put you in a position where you're definitely a lot more hireable. And if you kind of position yourself at a studio as, you know, the go-to person who is able to kind of build tools for everyone, you know, as you're working. So you're working away in 3D, you're building all this stuff, sharing that with other people. It kind of puts you in a situation where you're probably going to be the last one to get laid off if people start getting laid off, because you're someone that's really kind of bringing value to the studio. You know, I think it just really kind of puts you in a whole other level, having these abilities that make you kind of like a next level artist, having the creative side as well as the technical side. And every single time I've worked at a studio and I've seen there be that one or two people who are just like seen as gods or really respected at the studio, a lot of the time it's because they can code and they can script. Obviously, you know, if your creative skills suck and you're just not good, but you can script, that's one thing. But like, I think just having the bridge of being both left and right brain definitely just makes you like a whole other artist. And most artists that I know at, let's say, Weta, know both of that. ILM, it depends on which departments you're in. When they hire technical people, like they hire amazing technical people, there's a whole hierarchy there of usually the technical guys come from having a computer science background. When they come in, they're the ones who get groomed into being visual effects supervisors, and it's like a whole other thing. So usually if you're a creative artist there, you come in and you stay a creative artist. But depending on the studios you go to, it's definitely, you know, it's always an advantage to have that. And definitely at some of the bigger studios, it's really favored upon having that ability, having the ability to automate tools and to script a lot of what you're doing. So I hope that helped a bit. Again, such a big subject, but I really hope this has benefited you. And I'm going to leave it there. Thanks again for listening. Finally, like I said, I've got some Periscope episodes coming up. This is something I keep putting off a little bit just because I'm trying to create some content specifically for it. But like I said, add me. Same thing with Twitter and everything. It's just Alan FT McKay. So ALLANFTMCKAY. And so yeah, like when it does happen, which will be sometime this month, I promise. You know, I'm going to start putting them out rapid fire. I think it's more, I just got to like break the seal and actually do it. You know, it's just a whole new platform, and I guess I'm, you know, worried I'm going to fumble in one way or another, but I just want to have some good content to get it started. But I can see myself being addicted to it pretty soon when I do start, so it'll probably happen a lot. It'll be a great chance to interact with a lot of you guys, so I'm excited about that. Other than that, next episode, I'm hoping to have Amanda Gillespie, who is my immigration lawyer. She's one of the biggest visa firms in the US that deals with immigration, especially in my industry. Actually, I know so many people who are with her that like whenever I ask people about their green card or the visa, it turns out we all have the same people. So she's really great and really knowledgeable, and I wanted to bring her on. So hopefully that's going to be the next episode. It just comes down to scheduling whether I get that one out in time, but that's going to be a really cool one. And I went on Facebook recently to poll everyone about questions they might have, so I'm going to try and incorporate all that in there. But if you have any questions right now, is really crucial. Any questions right now about visas or immigration or green cards, moving to the United States to work over here, or other countries as well, but this one's definitely going to be focused more on the US. But any questions you have, especially because 2016 is around the corner, maybe some of your big goals is to work in the US, in Hollywood or New York or something, shoot me an email, let me know, or write in the comments is probably better because I will be checking this out. So if you go to the show notes, www.alanmckay.com/51, and that if you leave a comment there, I will definitely incorporate those questions as much as I can into the next episode. So it should be really, really cool. And like I said, I've got lots of really cool announcements coming up. including the real review of the career intensive, industry drinks, Periscope stuff. I'm releasing a lot of really cool videos. I'm working around the clock right now, especially if you're in effects. I've got some really great stuff I've been working on really hard. I've actually spent weeks on trying to get ready, so I'm going to be releasing that. There's a few coming out today, as a matter of fact, but even next week I've got some really cool content coming up. And in addition to that, I will probably give everyone a chance, if you're on the inside list, to get in for the mentorship, which I'm going to be announcing in the next 2 weeks. So I might give everyone on the VIP inside list a heads up before it gets publicly announced, because I've only launched it twice ever before, and both times because there's such a limited amount of seats available, because this is something that I'm going to be working for a year. Like, we'll be talking a lot, and I'll be mentoring you guys, whether you're, advanced or whether you're just starting out. I'll be collaborating with all of you, and you will get a chance to collaborate with all of us in the group. So because of that, it actually fills up very, very quickly. Both times it filled up within the first week. So in other words, I announced it and we ran out of positions within a couple of days. So the second time, which was in May, it literally filled up in about three or 4 days. And, obviously after that, for a couple of weeks, I had people emailing me saying like, hey, I want to get in. And it's like, oh, yeah, you missed it. And since then, I get people emailing me throughout the year, like, when's the next chance to sign up? So what I'm going to be doing, and this is what I tell everyone, is get on the insiders list, because I'm going to announce it a few days early there. And this will give you a chance to hear about it before I publicly announce it. And I'm pretty sure one of these days I'm not even going to need to announce it publicly, because we'll probably just internally fill it up ahead of time. But basically, there's limited spots available, and it does fill up within a couple of days of being announced. So I want to give everyone on that list a chance to sign up ahead of time. Plus, on top of that, I'm just giving out free content all the time. And this is a perfect example where I'm going to be sending out probably about 15 to 20 hours of free advanced training in the next 2 weeks, just because it's getting close to Christmas and I want everyone to kind of amp up their skills and get ready for next year. And next episode, I might mention a little bit about the mentorship, just to kind of go into it a little bit. Like, for me, this has been a life changer. And this year alone, I mentioned there's someone who got 3 pay rises this year because of being in that, which I thought was super cool. But, we've had artists go to work at ILM, MPC. I've actually helped a lot of people try and get to their goals. So if they're working on trying to get an apprenticeship or try and get in a specific studio, a lot of times people have emailed me and I'm like, okay, let me sit with you and let's figure out how to go about this. And it's just been really cool. Like, there's people who've gone to work on Avengers, work on San Andreas, the movie, kind of work on all these really cool productions and kind of get their dream job, as well as just seeing people's skill sets just skyrocket, I guess, throughout the whole thing. It's just been so freaking cool. I love it. I've made all these friendships. When I was in Paris earlier this year, I got to actually hang out with a lot of guys who flew over from all over Europe. So I loved it. It's just been so cool. But I'll leave it there, guys. This has been great. I'll definitely mention a little bit about it next week, and I've got more episodes. I just want to cram this month full of as much content as I can to do with helping you kind of figure out like what your goals and what you want to do next year can be. So maybe you want to go and learn to script and do some cool stuff. Check out the show notes, like I said, alanmckay.com/51 for this episode. And if you want to go straight to the free content, alanmckay.com/51 download. All one word. All right, rock on, guys.